because this scoundrel did not agree to participate in their conspiracy against Henry. But his friend had many other attractive students in mind, who would certainly agree to fulfill Charlie's request for 200,000. He then showed a photo of the girl on his phone screen, saying that it would be easy to get her involved. Looking at the photo, even Charlie realized that this girl was too innocent, and it was unclear how his friend was able to find her. But the guy did not agree that she could be called innocent, believing that this girl would stand in any pose for 200,000. Meanwhile, Henry walked down the academy corridor and wondered how Sophia had managed to move to a new level overnight. But the main question that tormented the immortal spirit was where the sacred artifact was now, inside which the soul of his girlfriend was imprisoned. At that moment, Henry's thoughts were interrupted by one of the students, who had long been his devoted fan and was happy to see the king of the first years in person. The other students also ran up and surrounded the guy, showering him with a mountain of compliments. Looking from afar, Charlie understood that Henry would not be destined to enjoy his moment of glory for long, because another fate awaited him soon. But while every student wanted to talk to the star of the academy, the girl suddenly suggested that he look at the list that had been updated on the website that morning. At that moment, Jimmy gave his friend a friendly hug, realizing that at this rate he would soon take the top spot in the rankings. But then he turned his attention to the front door, where a young student stood for several minutes, having come to meet Henry. She immediately attracted the attention of all the guys in the class, because anyone would want to start a close relationship with her if they were in Henry's place. The girl modestly asked if the student who had recently won the annual competition had studied in this class. Not understanding why she was looking for him, Henry raised his hand and said that it was him if she had business with him. Then, without saying a word, she handed him the notebook for him to sign, confessing that she had liked Henry for a long time. She also added that she would be happy if he agreed to date her and made her the happiest girl. Of course, the guy could have left an autograph, but regarding the second request, she was clearly overdoing it. Immediately after this, the girl hurried to the exit and said that she would wait for his answer after class if he came to the appointed place. Unfortunately, this whole scene was seen by Sophia, who was clearly not pleased with how different girls were hanging around her boyfriend. Ignoring Sophia, Jimmy for some reason decided that his friend would drop his studies and run to where she invited him. But Henry himself at that moment was thinking about how to refuse her without hurting the feelings of the girl, who was probably confessing her love for the first time. However, Jimmy did not calm down and said that such a unique opportunity happens once in a lifetime and he is obliged to fulfill the student's request. Although his friends could always help him, and if he wanted, Jimmy could fulfill this request for him. But, looking back at the desk where Sophia was sitting, Henry realized that it was time to stop joking, because everything was clear from the girl's look. And then she turned away, and it became clear that she would hold a grudge against him for a long time for not turning down the student right away. Meanwhile, only one person knew why this student suddenly ran into the classroom and what was really behind her crush. Right after class, Henry went for a walk with the immortal spirit to the mountain behind the academy, where he spent a lot of time to be alone. Recalling today's incident, the spirit said that in his life he had never truly fallen in love, although he had once decided to follow a goddess and failed. Remembering this with humor, he still saw before his eyes that scene when he shamefully justified himself to the girl and convinced her that he had meant something else. Yes, these conversations brought back various thoughts from the past, although it was strange that this old man had never truly loved. At that moment, loud screams were heard somewhere from the depths of the forest, and the guy realized that someone needed help. The immortal spirit advised using mana to understand what kind of opponent they would face. Using magic, the spirit immediately determined that there were 4 strong fighters nearby, each of whom had reached the 7th rank in combat power. But without listening to him to the end, the guy instantly soared into the air and wanted to quickly get to that place. Soon he saw the girl he had seen in class today, but now she had been brutally beaten by a gang of guys he already knew. It was unclear what these guys wanted from the unfortunate girl, but from their appearance it was clear that no one was afraid of the court. It was in vain, for punishment came the next second, when Henry's foot struck the bastard right in the head. After such a blow, the guy flew far to the side and pierced the tree trunk with his body. Realizing that this student was no joke, his accomplice realized that he needed to finish the guy off as quickly as possible before he revealed his full power. Gathering all his magic into a fist, he was ready to smash Henry's face so that he wouldn't interfere with them doing what they wanted. However, even after being hit with both hands, the guy put his palms forward and blocked the blow as if it was training. And then he threw it down with such force that even the earth shattered into pieces and flew in all directions. The next blow from the winner of the competition put an end to it and forever discouraged the hooligans from fighting Henry. But suddenly the guy realized that the rest of his accomplices were on the sides and had bound his hands with a magic chain. The power was draining from him, meaning these chains were capable of draining his mana, just like Logan's magical rhizomes. If we continue, soon all of Henry's mana will be exhausted, and then he will become easy prey for these bastards. But it was hardly possible to use such a cheap trick against the winner of a competition, in which Henry defeated one of the strongest fighters. And the very next second he activated the magic of the new sacred blade, capable of breaking any chains. The blade headed towards those golden magical shackles that had been restricting every movement of its owner all this time. The boys could only watch as the chains broke on the wrists of the student, who was no longer such an easy target. If he was able to break through even the strongest magical chains, it was scary to imagine what he could do to them if they were to engage in battle with him. But having broken the chains on his wrists, Henry grabbed the remaining ends, and both guys on either side of him felt that they could not move. At that moment, Henry realized that he didn't need to look at his opponents, because with his inner vision he felt the energy of the space around him. Then he moved his arms lightly, but the boys were thrown into the air as if they had jumped on a huge trampoline. At first the guys weren't ready for this, but no one knew that the fight wasn't over, and they would have to endure a finishing blow. The next second, a loud noise from Henry's powerful energy was heard in the mountains, which could be heard from afar, and a whirlwind of dust rose in the forest. On either side of the boy, 2 deep craters remained, and looking down, the spirit understood that Henry had reached the peak of his abilities. Learning spells was slow due to the boy's low abilities, but all the magic of the Hall of Souls could be used by him to the fullest. Then, taking off his t-shirt, the guy wanted to hide the traces of the abuse that these scoundrels had committed against the poor student. He put his t-shirt on her so that she would not be ashamed to go with him to the settlement, and apologized for being late for the meeting. In response, the girl rushed to hug her savior with tears in her eyes, saying that he had appeared just in time. But immediately after that, she raised her sinister gaze and said that he had fallen for her tricks like a child. A voice came from nearby, a man whom Henry knew very well, and Charlie declared that he saw before him an animal in human form. This guy didn't come alone, but brought Logan, the master, and teacher Michelle with him to prove to them the bitter truth about Henry. Of course, the master did not expect this from one of his best students, but it was hard for him not to believe his eyes. It turned out that even Henry was capable of harassment, and it was he who became the person who defamed the unfortunate freshman. And she, continuing to play her role, threw herself into Charlie's arms, warmly thanking him for his help. The guys who got it badly confirmed every word of their young leader, saying that they bravely tried to take the girl away from the maniac. However, Logan wanted to know all the details, and he ordered the boys to tell everything they saw. Then they told a prepared story about how they were walking through the forest, and noticing a terrible scene, entered into a fight with a powerful maniac. In fact, Henry didn't care about their cheap tricks, and wanted to know what Charlie was up to. But instead of him, the cunning girl answered, quietly admitting that she didn't like him one bit, and that she confessed her love to him only for Charlie's money. Then, approaching him, Charlie admitted that he had prepared himself, and Henry would not get off his hook. This bastard had always wanted Henry dead, and this time he was determined to see it through to the end. Yesterday, the master was praising Henry in front of the entire school, calling him the greatest talent of the century, and today everything was turned upside down. He couldn't imagine that the guy would sink to the very bottom so quickly, revealing his true face, which he had previously hidden under the mask of a simpleton. A special unit of the Criminal Bureau was expected to arrive soon to interrogate not only Henry, but also Charlie, who became the first witness. Charlie, sitting opposite Henry, advised him to admit his guilt and not make the situation worse. To everyone's surprise, Henry not only refused to admit guilt, but also arrogantly lit a cigarette, blowing smoke out of his mouth. It became obvious that he would never listen to Charlie or the other members of the board. It was a strange reaction, considering that Henry was in dire straits and could be expelled from the academy. The master, although he himself saw the incident in the forest, still asked Henry to tell everything in detail if he had any excuses. Having put out his cigarette right on the table in the office, Henry began his story by saying that everything happened by accident. And then, with a wide smile, he declared that he had long wanted to rape Rebecca, and fortunately she herself invited him to talk in the dark forest. Everyone understood that Henry was putting on a comedy act, because that was exactly what the master and the disciplinary committee accused him of. It also seemed like an incredible coincidence that they appeared just at the moment he took off his t-shirt, as if they had been waiting for it. He told the horrific truth with humor, and many began to suspect that the whole rape scene was staged. Looking at Charlie, the master began to guess that he was somehow involved in this story, but did not want to admit it. Turning to Henry, Charlie asked if he thought the master and Michelle were liars. insisting on his version, which made everyone look bad. But instead of answering, Henry ripped his t-shirt off the very girl he had recently tried to help, but had now greatly changed his opinion of this scoundrel. The master continued to insist that it was difficult to believe Henry, because his version would mean that everyone around him was complete idiots. Putting his shirt back on, Henry asked everyone to think about his words again, so as not to look stupid in their own eyes. Charlie understood what Henry was getting at, but he didn't want to give in and said that he would get the punishment he deserved. These disputes began to irritate Logan, and he began to doubt his decision to participate in this adventure. Unexpectedly, Charlie offered Henry one last chance if he agreed to cooperate with the disciplinary committee. He promised that if Henry repented on his knees before the master and Michelle, he would get off with 2 years of imprisonment instead of 20 years. At that moment, a group of hunters burst into the office with an urgent report, and the commander said that they had come to arrest one cultivator, for whom a warrant had already been received. The master did not expect to see this guy here, who once, many years ago, was the same student at the academy. Henry knew this man from his past life, who was the head of the Immortal Criminal Bureau. Without taking his eyes off Henry, Charlie warned again that this was his last chance to kneel and repent. He was already imagining how the video camera on the ceiling was recording this moment, and how he would later get this recording for his personal archive. But Henry was in no hurry to fulfill the request, and in response suggested that Charlie kneel down himself. Moreover, he demanded that the master also kneel down next to Charlie and ask him for forgiveness for the humiliation. It was hard to believe that even under the threat of death or long imprisonment, Henry did not repent, but continued his stupid antics. Suddenly Michelle, looking down, said that Henry's grades were indeed terrible, as was his behavior at the academy. Charlie, as the head boy, confirmed the teacher's words and declared that Henry deserved the death penalty. However, Michelle then stood up and stated that she could not fully trust her students, especially after the latest incident involving Charlie and Agatha. Henry was surprised that there was still a person in this room who listened to his words and seemed to have gone over to his side. The master didn't understand why Michelle had changed her mind so abruptly, but he had no reason not to trust her. And then Michelle said that Henry was lied to, and that it was done by one of the academy students simply out of revenge. Charlie immediately declared that all this chatter was only distracting from the essence of the matter, and ordered the hunters to take away the dangerous criminal. It was difficult to go against Michelle's words, but the hunter apologized to her, explaining that they were on duty and had to carry out orders. Michelle looked at him sternly and reminded him that she had once been their class teacher, and that they were obliged to respect her authority. The boys had not yet forgotten how strict this woman was, because she could make them hold full buckets of water over their heads for several hours in a row as a punishment. But the chief hunter reminded her that the Criminal Bureau had the right to execute guilty cultivators without her permission. It seemed as if someone in this room dared to teach her, although it was she who taught them everything they know and apply in their work. Charlie knew that arguing with the chief immortal cultivator would not bode well for Michelle, and was glad that everything was going according to his plan. Finally, Michelle warned the cultivator that if he didn't step aside, then there was no point in complaining later that he hadn't been warned. Suddenly, the entire academy building shook. Small stones fell from the ceiling and it became clear who had caused this magic. Looking at the aura that had thickened around the lead hunter, Henry realized that he had suppressed the entire room with a single burst of energy. It's no wonder that this guy once led all the immortals in the city and united them to destroy the witch clan. It was obvious that he would not give in to Michelle, but the master asked him to calm down and not do anything stupid. In the end, both of them could die in this fight, because Michelle also had tremendous strength and fighting skills. However, it seemed that Michelle was not averse to testing her strength in an open duel with this restless hunter. Two powerful, opposing forces flared up in the hall, knocking down several participants in the meeting. And if this had continued, it would soon have smashed all the furniture to pieces. The hunter seethed with rage, realizing that he had lost control of his body and could not even move. His subordinates felt the same. None of them could move a finger, let alone use their destructive energy. It turned out that the fire dragon's magic covered everyone present, and even Henry could not resist this powerful woman. It remained a mystery why Michelle, with such abilities, still worked as a simple teacher at the academy, when she could have headed the entire criminal bureau. Stretching her hand forward and pointing her finger downwards, she used magic to try to force the recalcitrant hunter to bow before her. At that very moment, the chief hunter fell to one knee, although he had not intended to do so. But for some reason his body refused to obey him. He knew about Michelle's talents, but he didn't expect her power to be so great. It turned out that this attractive girl with glasses was an experienced magician, capable of dealing not only with hunters, but also with the most powerful monsters. And if she really decided to defend a murderer and rapist, then the Criminal Bureau would have to retreat, unable to fight her. True, her actions could have jeopardized the reputation of the entire pavilion, and then Michelle would have regretted her decision. But this girl always went against the rules, and if it was the price to pay, she was willing to accept it. Perhaps even the master didn't know that Michelle had played a key role in the creation of the Criminal Bureau, and it seemed like it was time for the chief hunter to find out. However, she stated that she was ready to allow them to arrest the guy, but within 7 days she would find evidence of his innocence. It was a good offer, and the hunter replied that if there was no evidence after that period, the guy would go to prison according to the law. But if Henry lied, she was ready to kill him with her own hands, so she hoped that her efforts would not be in vain. Soon, the boy was placed in solitary confinement, where he had to sit for a long time alone and in almost complete darkness. The immortal spirit supported his ward, because anger in such a situation, when you were set up, is a completely normal reaction. The boy decided to trust his teacher Michelle and wait for the day when she would collect evidence of his innocence. In addition, the room was completely isolated, so 7 days should be enough to perfect the new elixir. But then the door opened slightly, and someone wanted to talk to the guy personally about one important matter. Logan appeared at the threshold of the detention center, wanting to offer the guy a trial of life and death on behalf of the club president. He offered the boy to sign an agreement for a duel, which was to take place in 3 days on the academy's training field. Henry knew that the court of life and death was the highest contract between immortal cultivators, which was not subject to even the law. The guy refused with a smile, realizing that Logan was afraid of his justification and wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. Today's villains preferred to act stupidly and arrogantly, so the guy gave his final answer to this challenge. To enter into such a contract, mutual consent was required, and Henry did not agree and wanted to wait until the end of the week. He was absolutely right, because Logan did not have the same power as Michelle or the Academy Master, and the guy acted logically. But suddenly a photo of Sophia appeared in Logan's hand, and he suggested that Henry think again, whether he was ready to go all the way, or would change his mind. Jumping up from his seat, Henry asked not to touch at least this girl, but he understood that Charlie would do any dirty deeds. Left alone in the cell, Logan honestly admitted that this girl would die if Henry did not agree to a duel. He asked not to be forced to kill an innocent girl, and gave Henry one last chance to think about his choice. Instead of the bright future they could have built together, Logan somehow decided to obey that bastard Charlie, making a big mistake. The guy laughed loudly at these words, considering the bright future to be an invention of naive people. He used to love playing the hero too, but what it led to made him stop believing in fairy tales and the bright future that this student talked about. Then, lifting his shirt, he showed a red mark on his chest, left 2 years ago by his master. Henry knew that the red palm print was made by magic, but he didn't understand how Logan survived. Edward was considered the strongest in the academy for many years, and it was Logan who felt the full power of his magic. Then Edward pierced his body with his hand, because Logan had greatly offended his master, and deserved to bear this mark for the rest of his life. To survive, Logan took a special magic pill every month which cost a lot of money, and for this he carried out one mission after another. Only the most powerful alchemists could create such tablets, and there were no more than 10 of them in their city. And if he wanted to live, he had to earn money by catching criminals for whom the Criminal Bureau gave a good reward. But then he should have hated Edward, not praised his talents and called him the strongest warrior. Suddenly Logan told him that one day Charlie found him and offered him a priceless magic pill that supported his life and health much better. Henry reminded him that because of these pills, Logan's skills in spiritual practices were sharply reduced, but he knew perfectly well how to help him. But he didn't seem to want to listen, and turning sharply towards the door, was about to leave, leaving the guy alone. Finally, the guy loudly declared that he accepted the offer but warned that it would be a fight to the death. Misunderstanding this phrase, Logan gave the guy 3 days to prepare his farewell speech. Then he closed the door behind him, and Henry was left in the darkness of the cell again, thinking about his words. All this time, the atmosphere in the isolation ward was so tense that the spirit decided not to ask questions for now and wait for Logan to leave. As the founder of alchemy, the immortal spirit knew that Logan was taking the worst pill and wondered why Charlie gave him that one. True, now Henry was thinking about preparing for the duel, and the idea of brewing a new elixir came to him. The spirit could help him with this matter, deciding to support his ward in this race against time. Without wasting any precious minutes, they combined their forces and, using this ability, set to work. The plants and rare magic mushrooms that Henry had at his disposal served as excellent ingredients for creating a new elixir. Meanwhile, Logan went to the hospital where his old friend, who had served under him for many years, had been treated for a long time. Entering the room, he saw the commander surrounded by young subordinates, and it became clear that he had been through a lot. The commander immediately apologized for distracting his boss, but asked him to pay for his treatment, which he did not have enough money for. Logan, of course, wanted to help his subordinate, although he knew perfectly well how much money he himself needed to buy elixirs. And then he suddenly admitted that it was he who was dragging the entire team down, and this statement made everyone in the room fall silent. It was strange to hear this from Logan, and the subordinate replied that the boss should not exaggerate, and that it was better for everyone to calm down now. Besides, there was no turning back, and no matter what terrible things they did, no one left them any choice. Now they all had to stick together, and the young subordinate said that he was ready to go with Logan to the end. He was joined by the rest of the fighters, ready to do anything to cure Logan of his fatal illness. The entire club agreed with this young man, and many were ready to sacrifice everything so that their boss could find an antidote to magic. Anyone who heard something like that addressed to them would have difficulty holding back their tears, and Logan heard such a touching confession for the first time in his life. Of course, after that he cast aside all doubts about the duel with Henry and finally declared that he would soon solve this little problem. Now he was sure that everything would end and become as before, and for this he needed to deal with Henry as soon as possible. A few days later, the campus sports ground was set for a competition between two strong opponents whose names every student knew. Stephen wished victory to Henry's opponent, thinking that this guy was good only at first glance. These students used to think they had to look up to Henry, but they recently learned what a jerk he really was. It seemed that Charlie's plan had succeeded, and now everyone was to see the true face of the freshman who had recently been considered an idol. But Henry's friends knew that this was a vile slander, and that he was in fact who the students knew him to be after winning the annual competition. Charlie was prepared for his friends to defend Henry, and reminded him that he was not the only one who thought he was a freak. And then, pointing to Rebecca, he declared that this girl had become the victim of a scoundrel, and that she certainly could not lie. Continuing to play the role of the victim, Rebecca burst into tears, saying that she did not expect such an act from Henry, who almost dishonored her in that forest. Then a crowd of students began screaming at Henry's friends, accusing them of supporting the rapist and bringing dishonor on the academy. The evidence of the students' guilt was very convincing, and Charlie once again suggested that he look the truth in the eye, which spoke for itself. Suddenly, Julia's figure appeared above the stadium, declaring that Rebecca